Good evening. Tonight, the story is not just about geography or politics. It's about a moment in history unfolding in West Africa, in a region long overshadowed by foreign interests. The Sahel, stretching across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has captured global attention not for peace, but for a subtle, ongoing contest of influence. For decades, foreign powers, particularly France, maintained a presence in the Sahel under the banner of counterterrorism. Convoys rolled through dusty roads, helicopters hummed above villages, and bases dotted strategic points. The narrative presented to the world was clear: France and its European allies were there to provide security and stability. Yet a closer look reveals a more complex story. When French forces announced their withdrawal from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, global media framed it as a historic turning point. Headlines praised the end of a colonial footprint. Cameras caught soldiers waving from armored convoys, flags being lowered, and official statements spoke of partnership, cooperation, and the future of African security. For audiences in the US, UK, and France, this seemed like closure, a symbolic handover of responsibility. But in the Sahel, withdrawal rarely equates to absence. Analysts and local officials quickly noted that French and European military presence had simply shifted, not disappeared. Within weeks, new bases, joint training programs, and advisory missions appeared in surrounding countries: Benin to the east, Côte d'Ivoire to the south, and Senegal to the west. Each operation was publicly described as cooperation, yet strategically, they created a ring of influence around the Sahel. Observers described it as a modern form of encirclement. The rifles rarely pointed toward extremist threats. Instead, the posture suggested surveillance of nations asserting sovereignty. Tanks may have left the desert roads, but drones continued to hum in the night skies, unseen and persistent. In this silent war, visibility was measured not in firepower, but in control. At the center of this unfolding story is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader of Burkina Faso. To his supporters, he represents the legacy of Thomas Sankara, a symbol of national dignity and African self-determination. To critics, particularly in Western media, he is seen as a challenge to the established order. Regardless of perspective, Traoré has become the face of a larger question. Can a nation maintain true sovereignty when surrounded by foreign influence, framed as security cooperation? Under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso has taken decisive steps. French troops were expelled, foreign journalists accused of espionage were removed, and new military cooperation agreements were signed with Moscow. These moves were not quiet gestures. They were public, deliberate assertions of independence. Traoré himself stated in broadcasts, "We are not against the West. We are against submission." Across the Sahel, these words resonated like thunder, signaling a break from decades of dependency. While the West adjusted its language, talking of partnership and stability, the actions on the ground told a different story. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence revealed construction of new bases along borders, expansion of airfields in Côte d'Ivoire, and enhanced logistics in Benin and Senegal. From these locations, the Sahel could be observed and influenced without direct occupation. The French presence was everywhere, yet nowhere in official statements. Locals began describing this as encirclement. One trader said, "The empire has changed its clothes. It no longer wears medals. It wears cooperation across markets and mosques." Analysts in Washington, London, and Paris debated the significance. Was it security, strategic encirclement, or a soft form of colonial continuity? History suggests caution. Similar patterns unfolded in Indochina, North Africa, and the Middle East. Withdrawal followed by repositioning. Retreat followed by reinforcement. In 2023, when Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger declared independence from Western military structures, the move was framed in the West as bold yet risky. Yet in reality, it was a declaration of adulthood. These nations signaled that they intended to guard their own futures, even as external powers watched closely. The direction of foreign bases raised critical questions. Why were they positioned north, toward the Sahel, rather than south, toward the Gulf, where terrorist threats were claimed to originate? This repositioning suggested priorities beyond counterterrorism. Every fortress built under the guise of protection became a tool of surveillance. Villagers reported drones tracing invisible lines over their fields. Truck drivers noted foreign checkpoints manned by soldiers who spoke no local language. What began as security assistance increasingly resembled oversight. Traoré understood that sovereignty was as much about perception as it was about defense. He borrowed a principle from Sankara: the most powerful weapon is clarity. By broadcasting in local languages, using national media, and fostering domestic capability, Traoré sought to shape both narrative and reality. Burkina Faso trained its own officers, digitized national archives, and developed local infrastructure. Farmers formed cooperatives, bypassing foreign intermediaries. Small arms production began with local and allied technical assistance, reducing dependence on imports. These actions, while small individually, collectively redefined independence. They created a nation not dependent on foreign guidance or validation. But each act was monitored, often misrepresented in Western media as militarization, isolationism, or authoritarian drift. The contrast was stark. While France expanded regional presence, Traoré was labeled unpredictable, a threat to democracy. The selective framing underscored the information front of this new type of conflict. Economic measures reinforced this pressure. Access to international credit lines tightened. Development grants were frozen. Sanctions were hinted. Western media framed these as prudence or realism, yet on the ground they were experienced as retaliation for asserting sovereignty. Pipelines of gold, uranium, and lithium, long dominated by European companies, were redirected toward Africa and Asia. Military oversight ensured national profits remained inside African hands. The narrative war extended online. Leaks about projects such as Operation Horizon suggested monitoring of digital activity under counter-terror pretexts. If true, this represented surveillance not only of territory but of thought, communication, and potential resistance. The West maintained moral authority while quietly reinforcing influence through digital channels. Yet the Sahel adapted rapidly. State media, local journalists, and independent broadcasters reframed the story, Africa telling Africa's narrative. Local content highlighted economic independence, agricultural innovation, and community empowerment. Hashtags and slogans spread across the continent, connecting youth from Ghana to Tanzania, creating a digital solidarity movement. Efforts to censor or isolate the region often amplified the narrative instead. By mid-2024, the Sahel demonstrated resilience. Despite sanctions, currency fluctuations, and downgrades, the region advanced homegrown solutions. Universities trained engineers to replace foreign technology. Farmers and traders established cross-border networks. Mechanics and technicians converted military equipment into transport solutions. Each adaptation reinforced the larger story. Independence is actionable, not symbolic. Traoré's leadership also highlighted the psychological dimension of sovereignty. By addressing his people in their languages, promoting local narratives, and resisting foreign framing, he cultivated confidence and agency. Streets, markets, and radio stations became arenas for reinforcing national pride. The contrast with Western media messaging was stark. What the West framed as instability, the Sahel framed as recovery, adaptation, and restoration. Western powers responded cautiously. France rebranded influence through stability programs and infrastructure aid, maintaining operational capacity while avoiding overt military confrontation. Washington emphasized monitoring malign influences, signaling concern over Russian and Chinese involvement. Yet, the real concern was precedent. If the Sahel could assert independence successfully, other nations might follow. International diplomacy mirrored these tensions. At the United Nations, Western nations warned of vacuums and potential terrorist havens. The Sahel Alliance countered with clarity: "Our lands are not vacuums, they are nations." This simple declaration reframed the debate, asserting sovereignty over external assumptions of dependency. Russia and China participated with a focus on partnership rather than moral oversight, contrasting sharply with Western patterns of influence. By 2025, the Sahel had shifted from a region perceived as passive to a proactive architect of its own fate. Military defiance became social reconstruction. Factories nationalized and upgraded, mining operations redirected, agricultural networks strengthened. Young Africans engaged in technology, development, infrastructure, and governance. What Western observers labeled recklessness was in fact a disciplined exercise in sovereignty. The information front remained active. Think tanks, policy papers, and media reports sought to frame the narrative in terms favorable to Western interests. Yet the proliferation of local voices and digital content countered these efforts. Censorship often amplified the underlying message, connecting citizens across borders in a shared vision of independence. Economic pressures continued, but the Sahel adapted. State-run enterprises replaced foreign contractors, trade corridors bypassed European ports, gold and uranium remained under regional oversight. The narrative of dependency shifted to one of control, agency, and restoration. The psychological impact was profound. Citizens who once doubted their capacity for self-rule now witnessed tangible proof of autonomy. In summary, the Sahel represents a multi-dimensional struggle: military, economic, digital, and ideological. The region's experience challenges assumptions long held in Western capitals. It demonstrates that sovereignty cannot be dictated externally and that independence requires both strategic patience and clarity of vision. For audiences in the US, UK, and France, the implications are significant. Traditional paradigms of influence through military presence, economic leverage, and narrative control are no longer absolute. The Sahel demonstrates that nations can assert sovereignty while navigating external pressure, reshaping the global balance of power in subtle yet profound ways. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has become the embodiment of this shift, a figure whose leadership combines strategic foresight, local empowerment, and international signaling. His decisions, measured and deliberate, highlight that independence is maintained through action, clarity, and the ability to redefine norms. As the sun sets over the Sahel tonight, the horizon no longer bleeds with warning, it glows with determination. While foreign bases may surround the region, they cannot encircle the spirit of nations that have learned to breathe without permission. The Sahel story is not merely regional. It is a blueprint for the assertion of sovereignty in the 21st century. And for global audiences watching closely, it raises a crucial question: how should nations navigate a world where influence is no longer guaranteed by presence, but by narrative, agency, and the resolve of the people themselves? This is the Sahel's awakening, an unfolding story of independence, strategy, and resilience. And it serves as a reminder that history's next chapters are written not by those who occupy, but by those who refuse to be contained.